In the previous lecture, we took a look at how to add to our Shopify cart using Vue.js instead of the HTML form. And if we go back into the code, we can see that the form is literally doing nothing here. We could replace this form with a div and it would work the same way. The reason we did this is because it gives us a lot of flexibility when working with products. So let's quickly review what we did in the last lecture. We created a variable called product form, and this is a Vue component. Then we set our delimiters, and we created a data object inside of our app. Then we used the created method to get the product's info. And then we created the methods object for Vue.js, and we created the add to cart function inside of it, which we reference inside of our code over here. So whenever the button is clicked, this function gets triggered and it basically adds to cart. Where does it get the variant from? Well, first of all, whenever the page first loads, we load in the data inside of our variant variable. And then whenever the add to cart event is triggered, we're passing in the variant ID and the quantity. And then we're using the Shopify add.js endpoint to actually add the product to our cart. Now let me show you where you can reference these cart objects. The particular API that we use is called the Ajax API. So you can go ahead and just Google Shopify Ajax. I will also have this link available to you in the lecture notes. And then let's scroll down and click on Shopify Ajax API reference. And once we're here, we can click on the cart. And then we have a few other ones. We have like the product as well as the recommendation. So let's click on the cart one. And we can see that we have a few methods available to us here. We have the post, the get, and then cart update, and then cart change, and cart clear. So we can utilize all of these just by making calls to the endpoint. And we can see here that in order to add to the cart, we need the ID and the quantity. And they're using jQuery here to make the post request, but we're using Vue.js. Like I said earlier, the reason we're not using jQuery is because it's a little bit outdated already and doesn't give us the flexibility of a more modern JavaScript framework like Vue.js. We can also include the properties object. So for example, if you're doing a custom product and you want somebody to personalize it with their name, you can include the properties with the post request. And then this appears on the Shopify backend, so that whenever you're fulfilling the order, you can see exactly what the name of the customer is or whatever else they might want to put in there. And then we have things like add line properties, add a styling plan, and all kinds of different other stuff. Definitely take a look at this and familiarize yourself with the Shopify Ajax API because it's very important for building custom Shopify themes. We're going to be covering a lot of these in the course, so don't worry, I'm going to be talking about them in way more detail as we go along and actually start adding products, refreshing the cart, and all things like that. So for now, we are basically just console logging the response. We're not really doing anything with the added cart functionality. What we're going to be implementing in later lectures is actually adding a slide out cart that gets triggered whenever you add a product to the cart. And that cart is also going to be dynamic so that you can see the changes on it right away without having to refresh the page. And that's pretty much the whole purpose of a Shopify Ajax API, is to be able to make these changes on the fly and not have to refresh the page every time. So let's start building out our custom select dropdown. And as you can see here, the regular dropdown is this generic one where it looks very bad. So a few things that we need to do. We first need to separate the Shopify product options. If we go back into our products tab here and we click on any particular product, we can see that there are two options available. So we have the color and the size. So basically each color has different sizes. By default, Shopify only allows 3 different types of options. And I'm going to be referencing this later on when we actually start building it out, because that's a very important consideration in the way that we're basically going to be architecting our data structure. So let's go back into the code now and start reformatting all of this. So first of all, let's go ahead and delete this variant ID that we posted. Then for the button, I want to add the ID here just to keep everything fairly the same. Then we're actually going to be deleting the whole select because we're going to be replacing it with a custom one. So let's go ahead and click on delete that. And then we can also remove the variant price. In our finished product, we do not have the quantity selector, so we're going to delete that as well. And then let's remove the quantity selector as well. So what we're left with now is just the buy button. So let's save that and let's see what we actually have. So we literally just have the add to cart button. We're going to be rebuilding this whole product form literally from scratch. So let's go ahead into our snippets now and create a new snippet, and we'll call this product option row. Excuse me, .liquid. And inside of the product option row, let's create a div with class product option row. And then inside of that, we'll create another div. One we'll call this product option label. And the label is basically going to be the labels over here. Now let's just open that. And then underneath that, we want the product option list, which is going to be hidden at the very beginning, but basically the list is all of this stuff, right? So we want this to be the label, and then we want the list to come up whenever we click on the product option label. So let's create a new div here, and we'll call this product option list. And so inside of this list is where we're actually going to have the names of the options. So let's save that. Go back into here. So inside of the product form, we're going to be using the Vue.js template syntax for each option. So the way that the template syntax works is by reusing a particular component. So basically it's like a for loop for Vue.js. And we can just give it a few lines here. And we can type in template. And then inside of the template, we'll create an empty div. And we will render our product option row here. So if all of this seems a little bit confusing right now, don't worry, just wait until the end of the lecture where everything is going to come together. This is definitely one of the most difficult lectures in this course, just because there's a lot of things going on here and a lot of new topics are being introduced. But if you have any questions about this at the end of the lecture, feel free to leave a question in the Q&A and I'll make sure to answer it. But basically, what we're doing is we're recreating the whole HTML drop-down selector using Vue.js, and this requires a few different parts. We're going to be keeping track of all of the options available to us and then letting the user choose them and updating the data continuously. So let's go down into the data object here and we'll remove the variants and then we'll create a few variables. So let's create the first one will be open, and then we'll give it an initial value of false. Then we will have the variants and we'll just leave it as an empty string for now. Then we will create a selected variable and we want this to be an array because we're going to be filling it up with the values that the person selects. And then we want to have a form variable, and this will be an object. And inside of the form variable, we'll just create another variable called selections and options. And we'll make both of these just empty strings. So for now, the options are empty, right? What we want to fill into the product variable is all of the data that we get from our Axios request. And let's just console log this again so that we can see what we're working with. Basically, we're going to be referencing just the product options. And if we go back here and we refresh, we can see the data, and we basically want to grab the options. As you can see here, we have the color and the size. So inside of the .then function, we'll have a few things going on, and I'll explain them as we go along, but it's definitely a lot to wrap your head around at the beginning. The first thing that we'll want to do is reference the form.options, and we'll say this .form.options equals results.data.options.map, because we're basically mapping over all of the options available to us here. And then we'll say item and open a round bracket and inside curly braces. And then we'll spread the item inside here. And then we'll also create a new variable now, and we'll call it visible, and we'll give it a value of false. So this is going to initially hide all of the values, and we're going to be referencing this visible variable later on. So let's just keep it in mind for now. And then we will update the variance object as well because it's empty right now. And then we can do this using this .variance equals results.data.variance. So the next thing that we want to do is actually push some values into the selected array. Now initially the selected will be the first value. So let's go ahead and say res.data.options.map. And again, we're mapping over all of the options there. And then we can say item this.selected.push, because we're literally pushing the items inside of the array. And then we'll say item.value 0. So what's happening here is that we're grabbing the first option here. So the first option is of the color is white, and we're pushing it inside of our selected array. And don't worry if this is a lot right now. Like I said again, this lecture is going to be pretty packed, but I'm going to be explaining everything as we go along once more. So once we actually start building out the select, everything will make more sense here. And then the last thing that we need to update is the selections inside of the form. And we can do this by saying this.form.selections, and then we'll make this equals to an array, and then this dot selected 0. And if this item exists, we'll say this dot selected 0. If it doesn't exist, we'll give it the value of null. And again, I'll explain what this all means. And let's just change all these values here to correspond to the spot of the options. All right, so we assigned all of the variables that we get from our product, and then we assign them to the data that we have stored over here. So basically what happens is we have some empty variables available to us here. And then once we actually get the product data, we start assigning the values to our variables. So what this all does is it fills out everything, and now we have all of the information available to us to start using it. So now let's go ahead and build out this template. So for the template, we want to have a v4, and inside of the v4, we will have option as the first value and I for index for the next value. And that this will be inside of form.options. This quote should be over here actually. So basically what we're saying here is that for option in form.options. So we're basically referencing all of the options available to us here, and we're looping over all of them. And then we'll give it a key value of the index. So we can save that. And now inside of our product option row, we can start referencing all of these items inside of the options. So let's just click save and go back to our product form and see what happened. So here it says res not defined, and that's because I used res here instead of results. So if I refresh again, cannot read property 0 of undefined. And there's a small typo over here in values. It should be item.values. So let's hit refresh, and all of the errors are gone now, and we're good to go to the next step. So now let's go into our product options row and actually use some of the items available to us. So the first value that we want to see if it works is the actual labels. So let's open up the Vue.js tags here, and we'll type in option.name because that's one of the things that should be available to us. And let's hit save, and we can see that color and size is now available to us. But this isn't necessarily what we want, because inside of our finished product, we have the option name, and then we have the option value over there. So what we can do now is we can create a span, and inside of the span, we'll create another view tag, and inside of here, we'll type in selected and I. So let's now hit save, go back into our product page, and we can see that for the color, we're given the first value, and for the size, we're given the first size, which is small. Perfect, so it's working pretty well for now. Now let's actually add some functionality where we can click on things and change the values. All right, so for the product option list, let's reference this visible value that we assigned here. So at the beginning, each of the options are assigned a value of false. So we'll say v if equals option.visible. So the v if is only gonna display this div if the option.value visible is true, which it is not at the beginning. So let's click save. And inside of the div, we want to create another template. And inside of this template, we want to have another v4. And this v4 will be for the values as well as the index. And let's assign it, instead of an I, we'll assign it index, just so that we can see the difference between the two. And then in options.values. Excuse me, this should be option. And then inside of the template, let's create a new div with a class of product option item. And then let's bring this down, and we'll create a click event. So at click equals, and then we'll say basically selected I equals value. So we're basically reassigning the value. So what we're doing here is that whenever we click on a new value, we want this to change. We want basically this value to be updated, because when we change the value to black, we want it to show black now. And we'll put a semicolon and then option dot visible. We want it to say false. And now we need to update the form value as well. So form dot selections equals value. So we're basically updating the selection value that we're going to be using to add to the cart. So whenever somebody changes the value in the drop-down select, we want to update everything and make sure that whenever we're adding to cart, we're dealing with the right product. And then inside of here, we can create another view tag and we'll type in value here. So let's hit save and see what we got. As we can see, nothing is clicking, and that's because we haven't actually set that functionality yet. So let's go back into the code and add that. The functionality will go inside of the label, because when we click on the label, we want to open up this product option list here. So let's add another click event, and we'll give it option.visible, a value of the opposite of option.visible. So the reason we're not just setting it to true is because we want to be able to toggle it. And the way to toggle something is to make it equal to the opposite of whatever that value is. So if this value is false, we're setting this value to true just by clicking on that button. And then we want to trigger the class name whenever a button is clicked. So let's type in class using the Vue.js notation here. And this allows us to add some logic inside of the class. And then we'll create a new class called label active. And we'll only show this if option.visible is true. Okay, so let's hit save there. And we'll use this class name a bit later. But for now, everything should be working as it should. So let's save everything and go back and refresh. And if we click on the label now, we can see that we're actually toggling the different options. And if we click on medium, it changes to medium. And if we click on black, it changes to black. Perfect. So it's working as it should now, which is a huge step. So now let's add it to cart and see if it works. So we'll click add to cart and we're getting an error here with 400. Okay, so we're getting this error because we actually didn't update the add to cart method yet. So in order to update the add to cart function, we'll need to do a few things. First of all, let's create a new variable and we'll call it selected variant. And no, we don't want that auto correction. And then we'll say this. This one's a little bit complicated, so we'll say this dot variance dot for each. And so we're basically taking this variance object that we have and we're going through each one of them. And then we're going to be comparing it to the options that we have selected in our custom selection form. And let me explain a little bit more about what we're doing exactly. In order to do this, I'm going to console log the results here again, just to show you what we're working with. And if we go back into our product, click on data, and as you can see, the options that we have available to us are the color and the size. Now, if we go into the actual variants and click on the first one, we can see that the first variant is actually the white small, which is what we have available right now. But if we change this to black small, then we will need to go to another variant actually, this one, black small. So what we need to do is compare what the user chose with the available variants that we have. And as you can see, there's option 1, option 2, option 3. And for now, our option 3 is null. And that's because we don't have a third option for this product. But we basically need to iterate through all of these variants and match them up with whatever the user has chosen. And then we'll add that to the cart when they click add to cart. Okay, so keep that in mind when we're going to be writing this out right now. So we're going to do for each, and then we'll say variant and the index. We don't really need the index for now, but we'll just include it just for consistency. And we'll say if variant.option1 triple equal sign this.form.selections, and then we'll choose the first one, and variant.option2 equals this.form.selections 1, and we'll say and variant.option3 equals this.form.selections 2. And then if all of those match, then we'll say selected variant equals variant. So now we're basically setting the variant to the variant that we find here. So we're saying that the selected variant is the one that we found through these iterations. And it's only going to do that if all 3 of the options match. Okay, that's very important to keep in mind. And this is also exactly why we checked here if there's an option. And if there is an option, we set it to whatever it is. If not, we set it to null. And the reason we set it to null is because that's what Shopify does by default when there's no option available for option 3 or option 2. Then the next thing that we'll need to do is change the data variable, and we'll say that the data variable is selected variant.id, and then we'll say quantity equals 1. So let's save this and see what we get. So let's refresh, and it seems to be working fine so far. So let's choose black here and medium, and we'll add to cart. And it seems like it got added to cart. So now we can go into our cart and see what we got. And we can see that the black medium did get added to our cart. So that's perfect. The add to cart works now. The custom drop down also works now. It's not styled, but this is pretty much 90% of the work. Well, congratulations. We have finished one of the most difficult parts of this course. Let's move on to the next section where we're actually going to start styling more of the product page and adding more functionality like the slide out menu and making our theme look the way that it should. I'm super excited to get this theme finished with you. And if you have any questions, remember you can always leave a question in the Q&A. So I'll see you in the next section.